I just got back from Computex, and if you've been anywhere near tech news this year, you already know the mood going in wasn't great. Memory prices have been climbing for months. RAM and SSDs are both getting more expensive at the same time. Tariffs have been messing with pricing and availability, and every conversation I had before this trip started with some version of, well, at least it can't get worse. I went in expecting a show full of doom and gloom, 5 days of walking around Taipei hearing vendors quietly admit that this year is rough. And honestly, some of that was true. But it wasn't the whole story, and I think the full picture deserves more nuance than the headlines have been giving it. So let's actually walk through what I saw, the bad, the surprisingly good, and the stuff that's genuinely exciting once you look past the price tags. Let's get the bad news out of the way first, because it's real, and it's worth being honest about. The elephant in the room this year was memory pricing, and it came up in almost every single meeting I had. RAM and SSD prices have been climbing steadily. And it's not a minor bump, it's a real structural problem that's affecting product design decisions across the entire industry right now. I sat in on more than one briefing where a company would show me a genuinely impressive new laptop or mini PC, and then almost apologetically explain that pricing on the configuration with more memory was going to be rough this year, purely because the memory itself costs so much more to source than it did even a year ago. You could feel vendors bracing for this conversation before customers even asked about it. Some companies were candid about it, others tried to route around the topic entirely, but it was clearly the single biggest shadow hanging over the whole show. That pricing pressure showed up most obviously in the handheld gaming PC space, which used to be the one corner of the PC world where you could reliably find genuinely exciting hardware at a semi-reasonable price. Not this year. Premium gaming handhelds, shown on the floor, including new models from MSI and Asus, are now routinely crossing the $1,000 mark, a threshold that would have seemed almost absurd for this category just a couple of years ago. When the component costs going into these devices keep climbing, that cost has to land somewhere, and right now it's landing squarely on the people who just want a decent handheld to play games on the go. Laptops in general told a similar story, at least at the higher end. Big, flashy showcase machines with maxed out memory configurations were priced in ways that made you wince a little, and multiple vendors I spoke with were candid that their most memory-heavy configurations, the ones aimed at creators and AI workloads, are simply going to cost noticeably more this generation than equivalent configurations did last year, independent of whatever new chip or feature they're built around. It's not that the technology got worse, it's that one specific ingredient in the recipe got dramatically more expensive, and everybody's final price tag reflects that, whether they want it to or not. So yes, if you walk the floor purely looking at price tags on the flagship stuff, this year could feel discouraging. But here's where the story gets more interesting, because that same pricing pressure actually pushed some genuinely smart, consumer-friendly decisions out of companies that could have just as easily used the moment as an excuse to raise prices across the board instead. Let's start with something I did not expect to be excited about walking in. AMD bringing back support for its old AM4 desktop socket, specifically to launch a new budget-friendly CPU built for that older platform. AMD has talked for years about long-term AM4 support, but actually seeing them relaunch one of their most beloved gaming chips for that socket, rather than quietly letting it fade out, felt like a genuinely consumer-focused move in a year when it would have been easy to push everyone toward pricier new platforms instead. And the pricing is the real headline here. This chip is launching at a price point that's actually below what scalpers have been charging for older stock of similar chips on the resale market this year, and it's coming in cheaper than some individual graphics cards cost at launch. In a year defined by rising component costs, a major manufacturer choosing to extend the life of an older, cheaper platform rather than abandon it entirely is exactly the kind of decision that makes budget-conscious upgrades possible for people who aren't ready to rebuild an entire system from scratch. Dell did something similar in the laptop space that genuinely surprised me. Everybody walking into this show had one competitor quietly on their mind: Apple's budget MacBook, which has been putting real pressure on the entire Windows laptop lineup at the lower end of the market. Instead of ceding that territory, Dell brought back a revived version of its XPS 13, giving buyers a choice between Intel's newest efficient chip option or a more powerful but less battery-friendly alternative, depending on what actually matters to you. The pricing here is the part that stood out to me most. It starts at just under $600 for students through the fall, and just under $700 for everyone else after that. In a year where flagship pricing across the show felt inflated, seeing a genuinely competent 13-inch laptop with a backlit keyboard and a touchscreen land at that price point, specifically positioned to give Windows users a real, comparably priced alternative rather than forcing them to switch platforms, felt like one of the more quietly important announcements of the whole week. I also want to highlight a smaller laptop that grabbed me for entirely practical reasons, partly because I was living out of a suitcase in Taipei while I saw it. Acer showed off a lightweight travel-focused laptop weighing right around 2.25 pounds, with a rated battery life stretching to roughly 30 hours. That's the kind of spec sheet that actually matters when you're the one carrying the thing through an airport and trying to survive a full day of meetings without hunting for an outlet. It's built around Intel's newest efficient chip lineup, with an upgrade option available for people who want more graphics horsepower, paired with a genuinely nice OLED or IPS touchscreen depending on configuration. It's not the flashiest thing I saw all week, but it's exactly the kind of practical, well-executed machine that reminds you the PC industry can still make something genuinely useful without leaning entirely on hype. Now let's get into the biggest story of the show, because whatever you think about the direction the industry is heading, this one is genuinely significant. NVIDIA is now in the consumer CPU business. NVIDIA unveiled something called RTX Spark, a new chip platform built specifically for laptops and desktop PCs. And this is a real departure for a company that has spent decades known almost exclusively for graphics cards. The chip pairs a 20-core ARM-based processor with a Blackwell GPU packing over 6,000 CUDA cores, alongside the latest generation of NVIDIA's dedicated AI acceleration hardware, all tied together using NVIDIA's own high-speed chip interconnect technology. Depending on configuration, it supports up to 128 gigabytes of unified memory, and NVIDIA is claiming genuinely massive AI compute performance out of the platform, framing the whole thing as the most efficient system architecture the company has ever built for this space. This isn't a small side project. Microsoft was standing right alongside NVIDIA at this reveal, having reportedly built specific optimizations directly into Windows just for this platform. Optimizations Microsoft apparently never bothered building for previous attempts at ARM-based Windows laptops from other chip makers. When Microsoft goes out of its way to do platform-specific engineering work like that, it tells you they're taking this particular attempt at Windows on ARM far more seriously than the ones that came before it. I got to see this thing in person during a hands-on walk through NVIDIA setup, split across multiple demo rooms covering gaming, creative work, and AI-focused workloads, all running on Microsoft's own Surface hardware. It's genuinely impressive to watch in action, and it's easy to see why this is being treated as a serious, credible threat to the traditional x86 processor duopoly that's dominated Windows laptops for basically forever. The catch, and it's a real one if you were hoping to buy this immediately, is that these chips won't actually start shipping in laptops and mini PCs until the fall. So this is very much a here's what's coming story rather than a go buy this today story. But the ambition on display here was hard to ignore. Intel, for their part, spent this show trying to reassure everyone that reports of their demise have been exaggerated, and honestly, they made a reasonably compelling case. Their CEO took the stage to detail a next-generation AI-focused chip, built specifically to handle massive memory capacities for AI workloads, supporting up to nearly half a terabyte of high-speed memory in some configurations. Beyond that specific chip, Intel spent real time at this show asserting that their newest manufacturing process is genuinely shipping at scale now, not just existing on a roadmap slide, and that their newest consumer chip platform is already powering hundreds of different laptop designs from partner companies. I sat in on a Q&A with Intel's CEO and a panel including a recently hired Qualcomm veteran now working at Intel, and when we specifically asked about rumors of Intel building its own answer to AMD's popular extra cache gaming chip technology, the response was a confident, if characteristically vague, promise that a strong roadmap is coming, and that Intel intends to compete directly in that specific corner of the market too. It's not a product announcement yet, but it's a notably more confident tone from Intel than we've heard in some of their recent public appearances. There was also a broader theme running underneath basically every major keynote at this show, and it's worth naming directly because I think it's going to define the next few years of this industry more than any single chip announcement will. Nearly every major hardware company is now explicitly building around AI agents. Not just AI features bolted onto existing software, but actual autonomous software agents meant to handle tasks on your behalf, deciding on their own when to run something locally on your device versus sending it out to the cloud. Multiple companies showed off their own version of this same basic idea, a routing layer that decides where your AI queries and tasks actually get processed. Based on some mix of your hardware's capability and whatever privacy policy the company has built into their particular system. It's a genuinely interesting technical direction, and there's real convenience potential in software that can intelligently offload work depending on what your specific device can handle. But it's also worth being clear-eyed about the trade-off buried inside that convenience. When your AI assistant is quietly deciding whether your query stays private on your device or gets shipped off to a company's servers, that decision logic lives entirely inside software written by whichever company sold you the hardware in the first place. That's a meaningful shift in how much control users actually have over their own data. And it's happening quietly, mostly discussed in developer-focused sessions rather than the flashy keynote highlight reels, even though it's arguably one of the more consequential trends to come out of this entire show. On the graphics side, specifically, NVIDIA also used this show to detail an upgraded version of its image upscaling and ray tracing technology, promising a meaningfully more capable version of the transformer model powering their latest rendering pipeline, unifying denoising and upscaling into a single processing path, with a public release planned for later this summer. For anyone who cares about how modern games actually render and perform, this is a legitimately significant technical upgrade, and it's a good reminder that even in a year dominated by AI and pricing headlines, the fundamental graphics technology race hasn't slowed down at all. Now, let's talk about the fun, slightly ridiculous stuff, because Computex always delivers a healthy dose of that, and this year was no exception. Monitors continued their steady march toward genuinely excessive specs that nobody strictly needs, but everybody secretly wants. Alienware showed off a 39-inch curved gaming monitor supporting 5K resolution at up to 165 Hz in a dual-mode configuration, which is an enormous amount of screen real estate paired with an enormous amount of pixel density, well beyond what any current game actually requires to look great, but genuinely impressive to stand in front of regardless. Samsung, meanwhile, showed off what's reportedly the first 4K panel hitting 360 Hz using their QD OLED technology, a combination of resolution and refresh rate that would have sounded like pure science fiction on a monitor spec sheet just a few years ago. On the slightly weirder end of the show floor, Deepcool showed off a prototype small form factor PC that takes an almost comically direct approach to cooling. Instead of trying to fit a big air cooler entirely inside a compact case, they simply cut a hole in the case and let the CPU cooler poke straight out into the open air. It's a genuinely clever solution to the physical constraints of small form factor cooling, giving the processor unrestricted access to fresh air, regardless of how tightly everything else is packed inside, though it does come with the obvious, slightly funny drawback that you're now inviting unfiltered dust and debris directly onto your CPU cooler with zero protection. It's not a product I'd necessarily want sitting under my desk long term, but it's exactly the kind of creative, slightly unhinged engineering experiment that makes walking this show floor fun every year. Lian Li, meanwhile, showed off a sit-stand desk with an entire PC case built directly into it, tucked discreetly into one back corner with a tempered glass window letting you peek in at the hardware. Mostly mesh case design supporting full-size components including large power supplies and sizable liquid cooling setups, plus a small built-in display for monitoring system stats right there on the desk surface. It's the kind of integrated furniture meets PC case concept that shows up periodically at shows like this, and while I'm genuinely not sure how many people are ready to commit to buying a desk and a case as a single combined purchase, it's a fun, well-executed take on an idea I don't think anyone's quite nailed yet. Overclockers also had their moment in the spotlight, with Gigabyte's team setting a new world record for memory speed using Corsair memory modules, alongside picking up 10 separate first-place finishes in a major annual overclocking competition held alongside the show. This stuff doesn't necessarily affect what any of us end up buying, but there's something genuinely fun about watching a dedicated team of enthusiasts push hardware to its absolute limit in real time on a show floor, chasing records that exist purely because pushing the boundary is interesting in its own right. So, stepping back from all of it, here's where I actually landed after 5 days of walking this show floor. Yes, the memory pricing situation is real, it's affecting product decisions across the entire industry, and it's genuinely pushing flagship and premium hardware prices up in ways that are frustrating if you were hoping for a straightforward upgrade this year. That part of the story is accurate, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make a more upbeat video. But the interesting thing about pricing pressure like this is that it doesn't affect every part of the market equally, and it doesn't automatically mean every company responds by simply raising prices and calling it a day. AMD chose to extend life and value into an older, cheaper platform instead of abandoning it. Dell chose to build a genuinely competitive budget laptop, specifically to keep Windows users from jumping ship to Apple's cheaper offering. Acer built something genuinely practical and travel-friendly rather than chasing the most expensive spec sheet possible. And underneath all of the pricing headlines, some of the most technically ambitious hardware I've ever seen at this show. NVIDIA's first real consumer CPU platform, Intel's new manufacturing process finally shipping at real scale, upgraded graphics rendering technology, was still very much on display, moving forward, regardless of what's happening with memory prices. That's really the takeaway I want to leave you with. Computex this year wasn't a show full of unambiguous great news, and I'm not going to tell you it was, but it also wasn't the wall-to-wall doom and gloom that a lot of the pre-show narrative was setting up. It was a genuinely mixed show, with real financial pressure, squeezing certain parts of the market and real, meaningful innovation, and some smart, consumer-friendly decisions happening at the exact same time. Sometimes from the exact same companies feeling that same pricing squeeze. If you're in the market for new hardware this year, that mix matters. It means paying closer attention than usual to which specific products and configurations are actually good deals right now, rather than assuming everything got equally more expensive across the board. Some genuinely did. And some companies use this exact moment to build something that's actually a better deal than what they were offering last year. Knowing the difference between those two categories is going to be the difference between a smart purchase and an overpriced one for the rest of this year.